Hello, my friends. My name is Maria, and I will now read you a story. So, settle in and listen. The Little Mermaid. Far out in the ocean, the water is as blue as the loveliest cornflower and as clear as the purest glass. But it is very deep there, deeper than any anchor cable can reach, and many church spires would have to be placed on top of one of another to reach above the surface. It is there that the people of the sea live. But you must not imagine that there is only a flat, white sand bottom there. No, the most wonderful trees and shrubs grow there, which are so pliant that they move by the slightest agitation of the water, just as if they were alive. Fishes, great and small, slip through the branches, just like the birds up in the air. In the very deepest spot is the palace of the Sea King. The walls are of coral, the long pointed windows of the purest amber, while the roof is formed of mussels, which open and close their shells according to the flow of the water, which looks very pretty, as in each one lie shining pearls, every one of which would be a splendid ornament in the crown of a queen. For many years the Sea King down there had been a widower, but his old mother kept house for him. She was a very clever woman, but proud of her birth, and therefore had 12 oysters on her tail, the most noble being allowed to carry only 6. Otherwise, she deserved much praise, particularly for loving the little sea princesses, her granddaughters, so much. They were 6 in number, but the loveliest of them all was the youngest. Her complexion was soft and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest lake. But like her sisters, she had no legs, her body finishing in a fishtail. All the day long they played in the great halls of the palace, where living flowers grew from the walls. They opened the great amber windows, and fishes swam into them, just like the swallows flying in when we open ours. But the fishes swam up to the princesses, ate from their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked. Outside the palace was a large garden with purple and indigo blue trees. The fruit shone like gold and the flowers like fire, while they always moved their stems and leaves. The ground was the finest sand, blue as the flames of burning sulphur. Over everything there lay a bluish glimmer. You might almost fancy that you were high up in the air, with the sky above and below, rather than at the bottom of the sea. In calm weather, the sun would look like a large crimson flower from the calyx of which the light streamed. Each one of the little princesses had her piece of ground in the garden, where she dug and planted what she liked best. One gave it the shape of a whale, another preferred that of a little mermaid, while the youngest made hers round as the sun, and had only flowers, like it, crimson in color. She was a wonderful child, quiet and thoughtful, and when the other sisters decorated their little gardens with all the strange objects they obtained from foundered vessels, she would only besides the crimson flowers, have the statue of a pretty boy of pure white marble which had come down in a wreck. By the side of it she planted a crimson weeping willow, which grew splendidly, overhanging it with its fresh green boughs, while the shadow on the blue sand moved with them. It looked as if the crown and the roots were playing, wishing to kiss each other. She had no greater pleasure than to hear talk of the world above, and her old grandmother had to tell her all she knew of ships and cities, human beings and animals. What seemed particularly strange to her was that on earth the flowers had scent, which they had not at the bottom of the sea, and that the woods were green, and that the fishes among the boughs could sing so beautifully that it was a pleasure to listen to them. They were the little birds, which her grandmother called fishes, for otherwise she would not have been understood, as they had never seen a bird. When you have filled your 15th year, said the grandmother, you shall be allowed to rise to the surface of the sea, sit in the moonlight on the rocks, and see the big ships pass, and even woods and cities. Next year the eldest was 15, and there being 1 year between each, the youngest would still have to wait 5 years before being allowed to come up and see how our world looked. But one promised the other to relate what she had seen and found most beautiful the first day, as their grandmother did not tell them everything, and there was much they wished to know. None of them longed more warmly for this event than the youngest, who was just the one who had to wait the longest, and who was so quiet and thoughtful. Many a night she stood at the open window, looking up through the deep blue water where the fishes splashed with their fins and tails. She could see the moon and the stars, and though they looked pale, they seemed through the water bigger than with us. If then something like a dark cloud glided before them, she knew that it was a whale or a ship with many people on board which passed above her. They hardly thought that a pretty little mermaid stood down below, raising her white arms towards them. The eldest princess was now 15 and was allowed to ascend to the surface. On her return, she had 100 things to relate, but the most delightful of all was, she said, to lie in the moonshine on a sandbank in calm water, close to the shore, looking at a big town where the lights twinkled like thousands of stars, to listen to the music, the noise of carriages, and the hum of human voices. To see the many churches with their spires, and hear the peal of bells. And the youngest longed all the more for all this just because she was not allowed to go up. How attentively she listened, and when later on in the evening she stood at the open window, looking up through the deep blue water, she thought of the big town with its noise and hum, and she even fancied she heard the church bells peal. The following year, the second sister was allowed to ascend and swim wherever she liked. She rose just as the sun was setting, and this was the spectacle she thought most lovely. The whole sky looked as of gold, she said, and the clouds. She was unable to describe their beauty. Red and violet ones had floated above her, But still faster flew a flock of wild swans across the water towards the sun, looking like a long white veil. She swam towards it herself, but it sank, and the rosy tint on sea and clouds faded away. The following year, the third sister ascended. She was most venturesome of them all, and swam up a big river falling into the sea. She saw lovely green hills covered with vine, and castles and houses peeping from among splendid woods. She heard the birds sing, and the sun shone so hot that she was often obliged to dive in order to cool her burning face. In a creek she came upon a number of children who were walking about and splashing in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they ran away frightened, and a little black animal came. It was a dog, but she had never seen one, which barked so furiously at her that she became frightened and went into the sea again. She should never forget the splendid woods, the green hills, and the lovely children who could swim in the water, although they had no fish tails. The fourth sister was not so venturesome, but remained out at sea, and she said that was the loveliest place. She had a view of many, many miles all round, and above her the heavens, looking like a gigantic cupola. She had seen ships, but they were so far that they looked like gulls. The merry dolphins had turned somersaults, and the big whales blown water through their nostrils, as if there were hundreds of fountains at work all round. At last the turn came to the fifth sister. Her birthday happened to be in winter, and therefore she saw what the others had not seen the first time. The sea was quite green in color, and icebergs were floating all around, each of which looked like a pearl, she said, and still they were bigger than the churches built by men. They had the most weird forms and glittered like diamonds. She had seated herself on one of the largest, the wind playing with her long hair, and every ship had avoided it in great fear. Towards night the sky became overcast, and it thundered and lightened, while the black waves hove the big icebergs upward, so that they shone in the fierce lightning. On board every ship the sails were reefed, and great fear prevailed. But she sat quiet on the big floating berg, and looked at the blue flaming forked lightning in zigzag strike the shining waves. The first time either sister had come up to the surface, she was delighted with all the new and beautiful things she saw. But now that they were grown up and could rise when they liked, they were indifferent and they longed for their home, so that after a month's time they considered that the loveliest place which they liked best. Many a night the five sisters rose arm in arm to the surface, and when the weather became stormy, threatening the wreck of a vessel, swam before it, singing so beautifully, for they had the loveliest voices, far lovelier than any human being, about the delights of the bottom of the sea, begging the sailors not to be afraid of descending there. But the sailors could not understand what they said, and believed it was only the wind. Neither did they see the delights down there, as when the ship went down they were drowned, and reached only when dead the palace of the Sea King. When in the evening the mermaids rose arm in arm, their little sister remained behind, alone gazing after them, and she felt as if she could cry. But mermaids have no tears and suffer therefore the more. Oh, if I only were 15, she said. I feel I shall like the world up there so much, and the people who dwell in it. At last she was 15. Well, now you too are fledged, said the grandmother. Come, let me decorate you like your sisters. And the old lady fastened a wreath of white lilies around her hair, each petal of which was half a pearl, and next she stuck 8 big oysters onto her tail to show her high rank. Oh, how it hurts! Exclaimed the little mermaid. Yes, but this is how it's done. She would so gladly have thrown off this splendor and laid aside the heavy wreath. Her crimson flowers suited her far better. But she dared not. Goodbye, she cried, and rose through the water as lightly and clear as a bubble. The sun had just set when she raised her head above the water, but still the clouds shone like gold and purple, and in the crimson sky the evening star twinkled so clearly and beautifully, and the air was fresh and balmy, and the sea calm and silent.